Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to Let's Have Renaissance, a podcast about writing, editing, publishing, literature, the arts, and more. I am Ito Otini.
And I'm Micaiah Otini, and today we're speaking with Emma Binder. Emma has published short fiction in the Michigan Quarterly Review, the Indiana Review, the Best American Short Stories, and elsewhere, and has received support from the Vermont Studio Center, Jentel, the Anderson Center, and Writing by Writers. We're excited to be with him today.
Thank you for tuning in. We're excited that you're here. Why don't you also subscribe, like, comment, and share this episode with your friends?
And if you know anyone who wants to come on the podcast, please do send them our way. Also, if you haven't yet, sign up for our newsletter where we share updates, resources, and opportunities at thedatekeepers.com.
Emma, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to have you. Can you tell us about yourself?
Sure. I grew up in Wisconsin and I've moved around a little bit over the years. I've lived in Western Massachusetts and in the Bay Area in California, but I am a Midwesterner at heart and came back pretty recently. So yeah, I write short stories and I'm working on a novel as well.
So do you prefer long form or like novel length, or do you prefer short stories?
I think they're so different that I find things to love about both of them. I think short stories are where I feel more at home and where I have more experience. This novel that I'm working on is the first novel that I've ever pursued to the finish. So yeah, they feel so different. I love drafting stories more than I love revising them, I guess I'll say. Whereas with novels, I've found that that's sort of inverted. The drafting process can be sort of fraught, but the revision feels a lot more straightforward and oftentimes joyful to me. With stories, there's almost no planning ahead for me. There's no like outlining or sort of structural thinking. It really always has been a process of sort of discovering what the story is as I'm drafting it, which can feel very exciting. You know, there's an element of discovery involved. So I have no idea when I'm writing a story, you know, necessarily where it will end, let alone what the revision or editing process will look like. Sometimes I sort of have a sense of like, I'm working in this scene and I know it's going to change later, but I'm not quite sure how. But that's the extent of it. With the novel, I've had to be much more fastidious and methodical about thinking about revision and structural changes as I'm writing it, just because it's so much bigger and more intricate and complex.
How about Flash?
Yeah, it's not a medium that I feel particularly drawn to, even though I enjoy reading it sometimes. My stories have just been getting longer as I get older. I think I'm artistically becoming more interested in intricacy and immersion and length and depth, sort of settling into long, deep scenes.
Who are some of your favorite short story writers, and are they your favorite because like you're trying to do something similar to what they do, or is appreciation different in your experience from imitation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love so many writers who my work is so different from theirs, but oftentimes there's kind of like a slantwise influence that you can't necessarily see, you know, like they look so different in terms of form and style and content, but there's something that is getting in. My favorite short story writer is probably Edward P. Jones. He's been a huge influence on me. He's most famous for his Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, The Known World, but on either side of that book, he published 2 short story collections, Lost in the City and All Aunt Hagar's Children. And he's someone who I turn to for his embrace of intricacy, especially in his later stories. His stories can be so long and take so many interesting turns. They're digressive, they're sort of unwieldy, but also technically very precise in other ways. But I really look to him as a source of inspiration, and I love the way that he creates portraits of groups of people and how different social actors in a system or in a place are interacting with each other and influencing each other. Alice Munro has also been a huge influence on me over time. She was really the person who I think taught me so many foundational things about narrative and story and structure when you're thinking about how a story moves and what it can do. Other writers I love who write short stories are Annie Proulx. Mark Richard is a big influence on me, and Dennis Johnson has always influenced me.
What is the story that, like, or type of book that throws you off and you can't finish it for whatever reason?
That's a great question. Yeah, I'm trying to think of, I definitely have come across books that I don't like, and I'm trying to think of if there's like a consistent through line of what I don't like. Because I feel like I can get into anything in terms of content. A writer can make me interested in any subject if it seems like they're passionate about it and if the writing is immersive enough. I would say that I tend more at this time in my life toward work that has a strong element of story, that has a narrative drive. I think if something feels a little bit too cerebral, or it's more, in the realms of ideas rather than in like the external incident or event that you would expect from a story. Sometimes I just find myself wanting that narrative drive, I guess.
I always, when talking to fellow writers, talk about the difference between storytelling and writing. Writing is, in my opinion, technical, and storytelling is different. And for me, if it's not well done, I get thrown off.
And personally, I think sometimes storytelling can stand up even if the writing is poor. It's harder for that to work. It often doesn't, but sometimes the storytelling can carry the piece even if the writing is poor. I don't think that's the case the other way around. Sometimes the writing can be beautiful, and if there's no story, it doesn't work.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think you can also tell, one of the magical things about writing fiction for me is that it sort of gives you information about yourself, because writing is a form of thinking, and it awakens you to the things that you believe and the stories that are important to you. I think sometimes that, like, to return to your question about what books sort of turn me off, sometimes you can sort of tell that like a writer hasn't really found a story that they feel like they need to tell, or that the story isn't something that they felt really compelled to write. They just wanted to write a book rather than tell this specific story. So oftentimes the best stories, even if the writing isn't of the caliber that you would want, you can still tell that someone felt the drive to tell this story and to tell the truth about something.
And how do you navigate characters who really are creepy, but you write about them and you have to imagine them and sometimes even feel, like experience some feelings or emotions or thoughts on their behalf?
Yeah, I definitely write about characters who I feel very different from, but I still feel like I'm always writing about characters that I have to understand in some way. Like there has to be something about them that I feel sympathetic or empathetic toward, because if there's not that bridge of understanding, then I feel like I can't really render them. I do think that every character that I write about, even if they're really like despicable, or if I wouldn't want to necessarily spend time with them, like there's something about them that I do understand, how they came to this place, or contextual aspects that made them who they are, or their blind spots, like the things that they can't see about themselves. So I don't know. I think that even when I don't like a character, there has to be some element of that understanding.
And can you tell us a bit more about the novel that you're working on, and how did you know this is the one that is going to be a novel, that it either won't fit in a short format, or you have enough that you want to say and enough things that you want to explore that you prefer to expand it into a novel and make that time commitment? How did it grow to the dimensions that it's now assuming?
So the book is about a group of queer people in Western Wisconsin who are living on this sort of commune or land project in a conservative place. And at the beginning of the book, something happens. There's an incident that sort of forces them to interact with this conservative community that is around them. It did start off as a story that was not working because there were so many characters in it. The dynamics were so complex that, it felt like a failure as a short story, and I couldn't figure out how to make it work. And then I sort of started building it out and realized that it wasn't working because the dynamics needed to be explored over a much larger span of time and space. It grew out of so many different obsessions and interests of mine. I'm really interested in communities and groups of people interacting. I'm interested in people trying to make homes for themselves in unusual or alternative ways. I'm interested in how chosen community or non-familial community has a sort of outsized importance for queer people in some ways, and also in rural places where community and other people come to have a more like logistical and practical importance in people's lives. I had seen so many friends of mine try to, start land projects or have communes or, live in collective or communal environments, and had seen all of the complications and joys and hopes and troubles that come with those experiments. And so I really wanted to explore those in fiction. And I felt like, especially after writing that failed story, that it really had to take place over the span of a novel. I had tried to write novels in the past just because I wanted to explore the form. I wanted to write one, but it is such a huge time commitment and it's such a psychological battle that nothing ever really stood up to that. But this story, because it was about so many things that I've been thinking about for years and years and that felt really important to me, I came to see that it was deserving of that time.
So it sounds like it's an ensemble cast. How have you found a structure that accommodates all those moving parts that you have to deal with when you have a lot of characters?
It's told in close third person, and the perspective changes from chapter to chapter. So there are a handful of characters whose perspective you get in a close third way. So it's pretty rooted in their perspectives. And it's traveling between, different groups of people who have different understandings of each other and different views of each other that are sort of contradictory and even have like contradictory memories of certain events. And so the close third really helps with that. But yeah, that was a structure that it took me a while to get there. I think the first time I tried to write the book, it was all in first person, and then it was all in close third of one character's perspective. It took actually reading some Jesmyn Ward for me to realize that it needed to be in that rotating close third.
We always ask guests to read it. Do you have an excerpt for us?
Yes, I do. I'll read an excerpt from a short story called What Would I Do for You? What Would You Do for Me? Which was first published in Michigan Quarterly Review and was republished in the Best American Short Stories this past year.
Congrats.
Thank you. So this is the opening of What Would I Do for You? What Would You Do for Me? As Cody walks around Pearl Lake, he thinks these guys are crazy. It's March, almost 50 degrees, and 3 men are guarding the tip-ups in their ice fishing holes, sitting on a melting lake without a care in the world. He used to see this every year when he was growing up in Iron River. Dark starbursts scar the lake where ice has melted and thinned, but some people seem to think that you can just wander around the bad parts, as if ice isn't all connected to itself. The men look like dozing bears in their seats, their small faces scorched pink from sunlight beaming off the ice. For his part, if while Cody's ice skating he hears that muffled shotgun sound of ice cracking apart, he's heading to shore. He's watched videos of how you're supposed to army crawl your way out of broken ice, and it looks like something he doesn't want to do. This is his first time in Iron River since he was 17. He hasn't been home since his dad quietly kicked him out after graduation, since he left Wisconsin and moved to Chicago to live with Taylor and June. After that, he got on T and moved with June to Western Massachusetts, where they had heard rural queers were living in communes and starting farms and living out some technicolor daydream of collectivism and love. It wasn't like that exactly, but it was better than anywhere he'd been before. He takes the western route around Pearl Lake toward a rock-knuckled ATV trail that will loop him back home. He's been in Wisconsin for 3 days. Cody's here to help around the house while his dad is in the hospital getting chemo, and he'll be around afterward when his dad's nauseous and bedbound. When Cody first walked into his childhood home, he shivered at the smell of mildewed wood paneling, plastic vacuum bags, dusty curtains, and corn oil. That smell melted his heart. It brought back everything good, watching PBS with his sister in the carpeted living room floor, wriggling into musty snow pants in winter, leaning on his mom's shoulder in the kitchen before they left for church. His sister Molly is the only person in his family he stayed close with during the past 7 years, and she's getting into town next week from Duluth. Molly has always had a way of acting as a translator between Cody and his parents, softening their words into something the other party could digest, if not understand. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Thanks, Emma.
Take care.
Keep it up. Bye-bye.
Bye.